Okay. Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule. It's beautiful outside. I mean, I almost don't want to be indoors. And that's not a bad thing. I think that's actually a really good thing. Wanting to be outside. Wow, that was random. Exceptional radio. I mean, it's so nice outside. I'm not even sure if it's like, if it feels right to call it spring or summer anymore. It's 76 degrees outside, but it doesn't feel like it. I've got low humidity, but it's just enough that my sinuses are functioning properly. There's a cricket.
I feel like the pollen's not too bad so far.
Yeah, like everything so far. I mean, man, what a good day. And the air quality index is like, let's see, it says 35. Air quality is considered satisfactory, and air pollution poses little or no risk.
Yeah, you can't really beat that.
Yeah, I mean,
like,
everything is in the green.
You know, I've been wondering for a long time if the climate change is giving us the LA weather in terms of what people in LA move there for. And it's actually now in Bloomington.
Hey, you know, the weather knows where it wants to live. It's peaceful out here. There aren't as many cars.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
Not as many cars and power lines.
There's not as much concrete or asphalt. Not as many buildings with air conditioners running all the time. And we're also like, I think like 600 to 700 feet above sea level, around, at least in Monroe County. So that's kind of nice.
Well, it's funny. I've been watching Storm Chasers on YouTube. It seems to be like the next thing, and I feel like there's at least two types of storm chasers, and one is like focused on the meteorology aspect, and then the other type is like the adrenaline junkie type. So they're very and then some of them will straight up like be pushing Christian propaganda and shit, and it's like the variety of people that get involved in this new it's not new in terms of like storm chasing isn't new, but as a content type on YouTube,
You know, it's interesting that you
um,
bring up storm chasing because early this week I saw a video of a heavily modified uh, truck, like a full size truck, like an F 350, I think, that had been modified to become a storm chasing vehicle. And it had all sorts
was
of
it called the Dominator?
maybe it was it was clad in so much stuff it looked like a Pontiac Aztec, except it was black and huge. And the guys inside it
Yeah,
were they were riding around. They were just screaming. I think these were the adrenaline junkies you were describing.
yeah.
They
I think you
drove,
might be talking about the Dominator
yeah,
3.
they drove right into the leading edge of a tornado and then stopped. And then they're just hooting and hollering like they're, like it's a rodeo.
Did the card like do this little transform thing where they're like, drop the shields,
Yeah, and the anchors and all that stuff.
and it like sits it down to the ground,
Yeah,
and then
I think we're definitely talking about the same vehicle.
those are the well, and right now that vehicle's out of commission
Oh!
because they did drive it directly into I think it was like an F3.
Oh, man.
But then like on a couple of them, um, the Dominator 4s, which are basically like just minivans that like don't nearly have the same remote outfitting, like not at all the same level. They had the windshields crack a couple times because of the hail, and it's like
Yeah. Yeah, it's
you see
the
the
Dominator 3
windshield
is the
cracking
one.
in real time.
Yeah, these things, they just look so strange. They don't look like vehicles. They look like they should belong. They kind of look like a giant version of the little reflectors that sit to divide lanes. It looks like a giant version of that.
It looks like if you told a kid in fifth grade, like, draw me a truck, and their inability to draw like realism and straight lines, it would end up looking like that. That's what like you said, it doesn't look like a real vehicle. It's just
Yeah.
some weird Pontiac Aztec looking thing.
And well, the funny thing is, I know it's a Ford because when they get inside it definitely looks like a Ford. But outside, it looks like a freaking Pontiac. As it boggles my mind. I'm sure that they've. I mean, this is the third iteration. There's more iterations of it. I'm assuming, but there and other designers who are building tornado interceptors, and they all have their take on this armored vehicle thing. But I mean, what problem is this actually solving?
Boredom.
This is like the dumbest version of bull riding.
Yeah, it really is. In terms of like, I I sincerely doubt that they're getting any
What, like real telemetry?
right, that the Doppler radars aren't getting.
What, that they couldn't just dump
In
a
terms of
swarm
like,
of sensors into it and
oh
then
my
get
God,
actual data from the tornado? It's not like that's not a thing. That's a
the
real
the
thing.
radars they use to predict where the tornadoes are gonna be are like giving them the data in
Yeah.
terms of like, I don't know how much more data they could actually get, and it does feel like this weird entertainment. It's not even edutainment. It's this entertainment type where it plays off of the um, ignorance of the viewer, and like, because the viewer doesn't understand that the storm chasers aren't going to get any new data that the National Weather Service doesn't already have.
It just occurred to me.
Like,
I just came up with the next extreme sport. It's wind tunneling, and what it is you go stand in a wind tunnel, and you try to stand there for as long as you can as it ramps up to speed, and eventually, when it gets up to speed, you just jump up and it blasts you out of the wind tunnel. This is just as safe as driving a truck into a fucking tornado. I guarantee it. Because
I mean,
I, we growing up, I remember seeing imagery of like entire semis in trees, like because the driver of the tractor was smart and abandoned the truck and went and hid underneath an overpass, and then a tornado picked up their whole ass semi and trailer and launched it into a grove of trees. I mean, whole ass houses get picked up by tornadoes. I don't think that they can put enough mass into a truck and expect the wheels to be able to withstand all of that additional mass. And, at some point, these things are just big coffins.
yeah, it's like a Darwin test. How many tornado chasers or storm chasers will we lose this year in unnecessary deaths? Because it's like, oh my god, it'll be some random shit like somebody getting hit in the head with a fucking giant piece of hail or some shit. Watch, because they get out of the trucks and go pick up pieces of hail when it starts hailing, and I'm like, a couple of them I've seen wear helmets when they do it, but some of them just run out like in Birkenstocks and fucking Crocs or whatever, and it's like,
well,
you are not prepared to be running out into a fucking supercell thunderstorm that could possibly what they call it, produce a tornado, and fucking as if it's like mating and producing offspring or something. And it's like the way they just run out during these gigantic fucking thunderstorms in the first place, I'm like, somebody's gonna get struck by lightning.
So
and it's kind of like,
apparently the majority
NASCAR.
of deaths associated with storm chasing are from car accidents, not from tornadoes themselves.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Well, and then you see like the road rage that's involved. That's where I feel like the adrenaline junkies are, on the one hand it makes sense, but they're also this danger to everybody else on the road because they're out there like
These
fucking
can't
trying to get to their storm.
these can't possibly be like DOT approved vehicles. Like,
Oh god, no
loading
way.
up all that armor onto these things. I mean,
No way, man.
even if they're starting with like a fucking Bearcat, which, oh crap, I probably just gave somebody an idea now. Even if they're starting with a Bearcat, that still requires like, it can't exceed its gross vehicle weight rating, like the total that it can actually absolutely weigh. And I mean, and that's not just a safety thing. That's also because that's what the whole thing is rated for, and it's so that it can drive on the road, so it can be taxed appropriately. Otherwise, they just destroy roads. I guess somebody who's doing this doesn't really care.
No, they're not worried. They're not actually worried about science.
They want
ironically.
they want to drive around in the worst conditions when nobody else is on the road, basically.
Well, and I feel like
And speed
it's more
like
about
crazy.
the show and the entertainment value of like, drop the shields, and like the whole
Engage the
visual
anchor.
effects. And in terms of like the way they have it outfitted, it's like you're riding around in a warthog on a remote planet looking for a storm or something. But it's like
It's a spacecraft. It's a spacecraft, and they're getting ready to like survive a meteor storm on the asteroid that they're exploring.
it's totally the new doomsday preppers in terms of like you're totally going to see a bunch of people spend thousands and tens of thousands of dollars on these vehicles to try to become the next big storm chaser.
These aren't even doomsday vehicles because they have no ground clearance. They get hung up on the first like real uneven terrain.
Well, I don't mean actual doomsday. I mean in terms of like when doomsday preppers were like
Oh,
a
I see.
fact.
Yeah, they're done doomsday prepping because they realize the apocalypse already happened, and that
Yeah.
what we've got now is like, a post-industrial society, and the reality is you better get ready for the, like the impending space race that's not going to happen because of course if you don't have your solar storm survival capable vehicle that can also travel on highways and stuff at high speed, then you're at risk of getting a sunburn. Oh man, it's I was reading that all of the big American vehicle manufacturers, for the past few years, they have, because the last decade has been SUV truck centric, and they've been discontinuing sedans, small sedan, medium sized sedan, full size sedan, and they even started clipping at the edges of the crossover microcosm. They stopped. Like Ford is going to stop producing 2-row crossovers. They're just going to focus on 3-row crossovers, which is insane. And as they move into electric vehicles, which are all going to have huge seating capacity, apparently, GM is doing it, and Dodge. I don't even know if Dodge makes cars anymore. I think they just make a minivan. I don't even know if they even make a minivan anymore. But anyways, so but for the last quarter, the trend has been down for trucks and SUVs, and it's swinging back up for sedans, which ironically are now only being made by like the Japanese and the Europeans. So,
So crazy.
so not only did they like price themselves out of a market because they're all of these companies are like lowering production of entry level vehicles and focusing on the high dollar fancy fully loaded vehicles. They're not only they're pricing themselves out of their market, they stopped producing the entry level products that bring in the customers who eventually step up to the fancy fully loaded super truck.
Sometimes it feels like the people at the top are trying to like crash capitalism by making the worst possible decisions in terms of like, oh, this terrible design, this terrible idea. Let's go with that in terms of how we're going to approach this next market move. And that's where I'm like,
Oh
everything you
man.
described just sounds like all of the worst possible
I
decisions
mean,
in terms of
it's
like,
almost like if capitalism was that car that the car salesman just slaps a couple times, like, yeah, this baby will take anything. Like seriously, at this point, it's almost like you're right. It's almost like some people might just be like, "This thing's so robust. Let's see what we can do with it. Let's see how hard we can make it swing." It's like some kid in elementary school finally they go outside and there's finally a ball on the tetherball's tether, but nobody knows how to use it because nobody's played tetherball in 20 years. So of
is that
course
an actual game? I mean,
it
like,
is. It
how do
actually
you
is.
score a point in tetherball?
Oh man, it has to go around the world. But you can't just like swing it really hard and wrap it around the top of the pole. There's like a whole. It's a really.
Doesn't sound like a real game to me.
It's
That
not a very
sounds like
fun game.
not an actual game.
Oh no,
It's
it was
like,
definitely a game, but I'm
I
not sure
mean,
it didn't have staying power, obviously.
it doesn't sound like can someone score a point? Because that's what I'm like. It doesn't. It, it's relative. Like, are you marking a point on the ground to show where
Oh
the
yeah, no,
tether?
there's a circle around it that's divided in half, and you have to stay in your hemisphere, and you have to get it around.
Is there a literal mark on the ground?
Yeah,
Because
they're
I've never
supposed to be.
seen. Yeah, because I've never seen a tether ball
Yeah,
with actual marks on the
yeah,
ground.
there's supposed to be a circle with that's divided into two hemispheres, and those are the playing areas, and you have to stay in the playing area. It's 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 an old game, and I don't think I've seen a tetherball on a tetherball pole that actually had a tether in 27 years at least, maybe more. maybe 30 years was the last time I saw a tetherball that actually had a tether and a ball on it with paint around the tetherball playing field. But yeah, I don't think there's like I don't think there's a culture that even plays tetherball anymore. If there even is a tetherball pole with a tether and a ball on it, who even knows how to use the damn thing?
I feel like tetherball was some shit that somebody put in a movie in the 1900s, and nobody ever actually played that shit in real life and was like, "Oh, I'm gonna be the tetherball champion in fucking 1919."
Oh man, I can just imagine some like it's earlier than that. It's like a late Victorian era to people who are in their very tightly bound outfits are just passing it gently back and forth. The total arc, maybe 2.5 feet between them as they have a conversation about something really unimportant. That's where tetherball exists.
The dawn of tetherball is so nebulous. Nobody can point to a real year in which it like actually was invented. It was sometime after 1895, and in the 1920s, schools and parks began adding them to their play area. But who knows when tetherball? Like that sounds so fucking fake in terms of like. Of course, people were doing it, but it sounds like one of those cultural plants where people are like, "Oh yeah, the tetherball court is active today," and you're like, "Wait, what?" Because in terms of like, okay, pickleball I see people playing pickleball. When you see those news stories about, oh, pickleball's the next thing. Well, yeah, I actually see people playing pickleball like every other fucking day on the tennis court. Well, now they're pickleball courts because people aren't playing tennis anymore. So it's like
they're the reason that they don't exist
I
anymore.
actually see that shit.
While playing with this equipment, there was a high risk of the ball smashing your face or breaking your hands or fingers because of hitting the pole instead of the ball. Due to the number of complaints and restrictions, this equipment became extinct on most playgrounds. Okay, well that makes sense why it doesn't exist, because it broke people's noses.
Easy.
That's why we don't have metal slides, polished metal slides too, because they hurt people.
Yeah, because even in all of the pictures on Wikipedia, none of them have actual markings on the ground. So it's like, yeah, this sounds like some. Well, it's like I don't know if you've ever played basketball with the street curbs.
Oh yeah.
It's like that's a game, but it's not a real game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's rules and there's like
it's like street ball.
There's no fucking street curb basketball league.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and there's like handball leagues. So it's like tetherball and handball are not in the same ballpark.
Oh
concerning,
no. Handball still exists too.
Oh yeah.
I think
there is a national tetherball league though. World Tetherball Association. That's crazy. Wait.
World Tetherball Championship. Yeah, no, this is just a bunch of pictures of normal people. This isn't a thing.
Yeah, their website's defunct. So.
Thailand. World Champ 24 players elimination. Well, this just sounds like Thunderdome.
It feels like some dude was like, "Oh, there's no national or World Tetherball League. Someone make a website."
You know what's funny is that tetherball is can't survive, but then things like power slapping is totally thriving.
Oh no, it's not.
It's not.
No, it's that's what's so funny about propaganda.
But I see all these like
fucking
big Russian dudes slapping the crap out of each other. It seems like they actually have an industry forming.
Oh, okay. Let me reframe that. In Russia, that's where it basically started.
Yeah.
So their shit's like established there. Yeah. They tried to bring it over to America, and then Dana White, there was like a power slap league, and then Dana White basically bought it and took all of the people in that, and were trying to like create a new league that was the Dana White League, and people were like skeptical, and it just so happened that right when it was about to air, he got in trouble for slapping his wife in a nightclub. So it was like he tried to distance himself from the power slap show that had his name on it at first, and then they're like, nah, we're not gonna distance. So he like stayed with it, and it
That
just did fucking
helped.
abysmal. The ratings were abysmal. It's like they're trying to pretend they weren't, but it had some of the lowest ratings ever.
That's funny.
Like,
Like,
just ever.
I didn't even realize that he was involved in it until basically just now. I mean, I had my you know, it seemed like the kind of thing that he'd be into, but I'd only been watching like the Eastern European stuff, like dudes with names I can't pronounce, women who knock the crap out of each other, like little dudes, big dudes, real big dudes, like two refrigerator wide dudes, like just slapping the crap out of each other, and it's amazing. Like, and they're inside these like, you know, it's not, they're not in an arena. They're usually in like a warehouse, and there's a like a, you know, a big stage that they've set up, and then there's a, you know, a table that they square off and then whack, and it maybe it happens twice, but sometimes it only happens once, and it looks like they're having like an incredible it looks, I mean, it looks very composed. It doesn't look like they just threw it together and there's a few guys with their phones. I mean, it's like fully produced, and the aesthetic is like, you know, industrial warehouse. These are some big dudes, let's watch them slap. And I mean, if this is what if this is like Russia's current contribution to extreme physical sports, that's that's okay. I'll watch it. It's pretty. It's sometimes it's entertaining. Like, I watched a woman slap this other woman, and then she fell back, tried to stand up, and then ends up doing a somersault, rolls around on the stage, and it's like, just like, you know, the lights are just trying to turn back on. Like, you can you can tell the moment that they're like their computer's starting to reboot.
So it wasn't the lowest ever rated show, but it was very close. It got a .05 rating, with the only other shows really rated lower with zeros.
Oh wow! So it actually it got a rating. It wasn't the worst, but
it averaged 200 and what was it? 220,000 viewers. No, that was the low. It averaged 240,000 viewers, which is like nothing.
Oh man, he's got a huge audience too. He's got a huge platform. They just didn't like it.
Supposedly.
Oh man, well, whatever the Russians are doing, whatever the Eastern European power slap leagues are doing, they're doing a really good job, because I actually got a really big kick out of that stuff. Because, you know, some of those dudes, and these are big bruisers, like they get up there and they've got like confidence of Hercules, and then the lights go out.
One of the issues is that's where one of the slappers died last year.
Oh shit!
Because they were doing heavyweights that are also like strongmen. So it's like when it's like regular dudes, you know, they'll get concussions or whatever. But when you use fucking Russian strongmen, they're
just hitting each other at that point. They're just cold cocking each other.
I think it might have been more than one at this point.
Oh wow.
Which again, the Russian is way more brutal. Like the power slapping in America, the Dana White stuff got to be really brutal, but it's not nearly as brutal as the Russian slap fighting.
Okay.
Again, I don't even watch. So I was like, okay, there's different levels.
I haven't seen like I've only seen people get knocked out.
Have I shown you Slap Mountain?
I don't think so.
So Slap Mountain is like the lowest level of slap fighting in terms of like it's actual comedy, but they're actually slapping people. So it's real slap fights, but the people doing it are like meth heads and fucking
Okay.
like 300-pound IHOP fucking addicts in terms of like these are not
These are not.
professional
They're not
athletes.
athletes at all.
Like
These are amateur amateurs. These are weak
professional amateurs.
professional amateurs.
Professionally amateur. And that's where it's like the commentary that they'll do along with it, it makes it fucking hilarious because you know these people aren't actually like getting hurt. Like they may get some welts on their cheek or something. Nobody's really getting teeth knocked out or some
Yeah.
shit like that. Whereas then there's like the Power Slap League, which is a step above that. Some of the people from Slap Mountain actually made appearances on Power Slap League. And then there's Dana White's Power Slap League, which is them trying to take Power Slap and make it super serious into like an actual sport with like multiple referees. One referee isn't enough. We got 3 referees. So it's like they're trying to make it into a serious sport. And then there's the Russian slap fights, which is basically like they want the most brutal. Like if you can get slapped into the next dimension, this is where it's gonna happen. So this is like the grades level. I don't watch the like highest because it's too much. Like
Yeah.
in terms of those people are getting hurt. Like
Yeah.
that's some
It's
shit
like
where
boxing.
you're like it's slapping. No, it's worse than boxing because here's the difference. In boxing, you can defend yourself. In this, not defending yourself is literally you get a penalty if you even remotely defending if you
Oh
remotely
yeah, like
defend yourself.
they get
So it's
penalized
like
if they flinch even.
it makes boxing look
Tame.
like classy and composed and fucking like organized and
Well, it is all those things.
evolved. It's like they call it the sweet science, but compared to like slap fighting, it actually looks like science.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people die in boxing. That definitely happens. So it's not like boxing's free from brain damage. It's the sheer numbers at this point.
So my understanding of like the mechanics of the power slap itself, it has a lot of similarities to like a cross or an uppercut, where the rotation of the skull itself causes the vascular tissue to stretch and compress and can momentarily reduce blood flow or can potentially perforate vascular tissue.
It's all out of the same muscles, but it's like closer to it's like the end of a hook,
Oh man.
which a hook isn't very different from an uppercut.
Yeah.
So it's more, but the issue is the torque, and uppercuts and hooks generate way more torque than crosses in terms of like, you can generate a similar amount of power and force, but the torque from the hook is just way more than a cross. So that's where it's like.
But it's in the rotation
like
of the neck where the damage is happening, right? That's really the danger of this
like
thing, because they're not
the rotation of the neck, but it's also the like.
Because like a boxer, they're allowed to like put their shoulder up and prepare for it and take it, and they're moving
exactly.
But
so
like the person who's just standing there, when their neck turns really hard, that's like. I mean, what kind of whiplash are they experiencing there? There's got to be all sorts of like neck trauma.
It's not even the neck trauma. That's part of it, but it's when the head gets turned, the quicker it gets turned without the person giving a shock absorption of some sort, that causes in turn the brain to bounce against the skull at the end of that head turn. So that's like when the real issue. Exactly. So that's when the whiplash results in the concussion, because your head whips and then your brain hits your skull at the end of that whip. So the
Yeah,
harder the
yeah.
neck turn, the more the brain is going to impact the inside of the skull. And the issue becomes with boxing and mixed martial arts, they cut weight so there's not as much fluid or fatty tissue inside the skull to protect that impact. So it's like it's not nearly as bad on that part with slap fighting because they're not cutting weight.
But they're
Or
also not
some of them,
padding
they
the
have weight
impacts.
classes, but they're not necessarily cutting. So it's not. But because they can't defend, that's why it's like
That's even
the
worse.
trade-off of not cutting weight. Yeah, then it's lost on them not like being able to flinch or to turn their head with it or whatever. Because then that's where it's like the notion that it's about being able to take the slap is there are going to be people who have bigger neck muscles or predisposed to have a better reaction to that whip, like Mike Tyson, for example.
Yeah.
Like his neck is just so big that it's going to actually be really hard. Like even if you hit him full force, his neck isn't going to whip that far because of the way it's
He's just built.
physically structured.
Yeah.
It's just built better for taking shots. Whereas somebody who doesn't have that neck, well, if they don't have the capacity to defend, it's going to basically be concussion, instant concussion, and potentially knockout concussion. So it's like every time I see somebody get slapped, I can't help but think about them getting a concussion every time they're getting a fucking slap. And then when they get the knockout, it's like, that's what you're there for. But when you know, like, better, it's like you can't help but think, oh, this guy in like 30 years is going to be fucking incoherent because of this particular slap. And there's times where most of the slaps aren't like that, but ever so often you'll see one slap where it's like, oh, that took some years off that person's life, or that's like definitely that person's now getting dementia because of, and it's like that's the way the Russian slap fights are almost every match
Yeah,
in
yeah.
terms of
You
like
can tell when the lights go
level.
out. You can see it in their
Yeah.
eyes in these videos. And these are some high definition videos. You can see that moment where the lights go out and the lights are just slowly coming back on. And if they don't get it together in that 30-second window, 30 seconds, man, that's way more time. I think every boxer in America would be able to get up in 30 seconds. Like, at least the boxing matches I've seen in the last decade, 30 seconds is a long time. These guys are getting hit really hard. And then they're going off and sniffing smelling salts on the sidelines between slap matches. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Like,
which again, the culture that they're trying to normalize, like they're not drug testing, so
no.
Who knows how many of these guys are on fucking steroids in terms of like
I mean, the video that I'm looking at right now, there's two guys that don't look like they're on steroids, but the guys around them definitely look like they're on steroids.
Yeah.
So this must be a lightweight class. Flyweights. Oh, they're stepping it up. One guy almost pulled the table off with him when he stepped back. And here's some bruisers. Yeah.
So yeah, that's
one
what
shot
I mean,
knockout. Like that's
it's
like
it's not equal.
No. These guys don't have necks either, and they're practically knocking each other out in like one shot. So that's like, I can see this kind of thing emerging out of like a factory where there might be like factory floor beef, and the two guys have to work next to each other for the next decade or longer, at least until someone dies or loses an arm, and so they got to sort it out really quick. And so guys slap it out real fast and then get over it. I can see something like that happening, but not this level of mismatched. I mean, some of these dudes definitely don't belong in whatever weight category that they're in. Like that, or the weight classes are just way too big, like in range. Whoa! This guy got hit in the ear and ruptured a bunch of blood vessels like down his neck, along his jaw. And they pulled him out. So yeah, there's like technique and issues involved. That kind of thing. That's the thing that would prevent this from being an Olympic sport.
Oh, there's no way.
No, I know.
It's never gonna.
It could never be an Olympic sport.
No way.
This is like a post-Olympic game that happens with coaches, probably. Only in Russia, though. Man. Yeah, I'm watching this video. Russian slaps 2021 scary knockouts. Some of these dudes actually have a kind of a look of fear, like they're concerned, like they know that the person who's about to hit them can really they're about to get waylaid. They know it's about to happen, and they're still doing it. I think this is one of those moments where like stupidity and courage are being confused with each other. Then again, I don't think any of these guys are trying to author any papers that are going to have any like broad impact over like cultural theory.
Well, it's funny you say that in terms of like, this is often how I think about a lot of like combat sports people, where I'm like, yeah, they're getting a brain injury, but like the best that person was ever going to do was like drive a UPS truck. Like, realistically. And it's not because every human is not capable of doing things of like higher like intelligence and necessity. Like, it's that person has decided they don't want to do anything with intelligence, and
Yeah.
a lot of people make that decision early on, and you can't really pull them back from that. So that's where I'm like, you know, what are these slap fighters really gonna do? Fucking be taking somebody's order at like Domino's or some shit? Like, that's the best they're gonna. And that's, again, nothing wrong with those positions, but it's like some of these, you see some of these people where they're like clearly have given up on
I mean, here's a
doing anything more than what they've done so far.
I'm watching another Russia slaps video. It says end of an era, and there was a brief what are they doing now, and one guy's face is like, deformed, like weirdly shaped now, and another guy is just chops wood, and another dude is unloading a truck on a farm. And so this.
Well, that guy with the deformed face, he like won the match, but his face was like fucking
Broken?
deformed. Yeah, and he was like, "Oh, it'll be fine," and then it wasn't fine, and it's like still not fine.
Yeah.
So I'm like, these people think, there's a level of delusion of invincibility that it takes to do certain things, like jumping out of a plane, or like squirrel suit diving, or what's it, wingsuit diving.
Oh man,
there's certain shit where you're like, oh, this person really doesn't give a fuck about death. Not to say that they don't have any drive or motivation, but if they like went squirrel suit or wingsuit diving and fucking hit a mountain, you'd know that they didn't care, because that's the only way you end up doing that is if you don't give a fuck.
One of those elite wingsuit camera operator dudes who's known for like trailing people and flying right next to mountain faces died recently, and that I don't know why that stuff popped up in my YouTube feed, but like it was like one of those stark reminders that humans aren't meant to fly for one very good reason, is that we are so frail that if we actually were just gliding through the air and hit anything, we would die. Absolutely die.
Yeah.
Our bodies would be wrecked.
Heavy and
frail, and we don't have the
not aerodynamic
at all. And so Man, I mean, it's beautiful to watch, but now we have drones that can do this stuff too. So drones are a lot, you know, easier to reassemble after they crash. They're just as difficult to recover, and it still relies on a flash card and a camera. So I don't know. I don't think I can rationalize extreme or thrill seekers behavior, because to me a lot of that stuff is just crazy. Like, I don't want to jump out of a plane. There was a time in my life where I thought, yeah, I'll jump out of a plane, but at this point, the only time I ever will consider jumping out of a plane is if the plane is about to crash and this is the only way that I have a chance of surviving. I don't think that's going to happen, because the only planes that I have any like would ever even get on, at least that I can project into, are large enough that they land on their belly and they slide for hundreds of meters, and then everyone rushes out so the thing doesn't blow up. And there's a pretty high survival rate with that kind of thing. But the idea of strapping some wings, so a flying squirrel suit on, and then jumping off of a mountain.
Yeah, you have to be at peace with like not doing anything after that flight. And I think that's where those people, when shit happens eventually, it's like you can't. I mean, they went out doing what they enjoyed. Like when Paul Walker died in a car crash, it's like, oh, rest in, your love, because that's the thing you love doing apparently. So you like gave your life for it, and it's like you can't feel bad for that person for dying doing the thing they love, and you shouldn't. But I feel like when thrill seekers and adrenaline junkies die, it's never quote unquote too soon, because they're always like fucking putting their nose right up to that line, like, oh, death, you gonna take me today? You gonna come get me, death? And it's like,
yeah, it's
okay,
only too
good.
soon if you're being safe and trying not to die, and doing everything you can to increase your chances of survival. It's if someone's a thrill seeker and they're tempting fate with death, then it's like a how long can they go kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's a different
exactly.
metric. That those are not equivocal at all.
And again, it's not even like, it's not about shame or like victim blaming or anything remotely like that, so much as like when these people are chasing these storms, inevitably some shit's gonna happen. Or when people are like doing these slap fights, inevitably some shit's gonna happen. And then it's like, who is to blame, and who is to like receive the pity at the end of that, in terms of like if there's pity to be given or received? Because then it's like, I don't, when a society is like watching those people do that to themselves, society kind of owes it to them to take care of them in late life. But everybody doesn't believe that, so it's not just going to happen on its own. So that's where I'm like, that's optimal. But when all these people go into the UFC or slap fighting and get taken advantage of by Dana White, knowing damn well that when the end comes, he's gonna fucking not know who their name is, or not know what their name is, and like, it's all about the money for him. It doesn't matter who they are as fighters. He's gonna eat them up and spit them out and fucking forget about them. And they all go into that willingly. So that's where it's like, would it be better for them to go to UPS? Probably, in terms of like, yeah, this is not to even remotely knock UPS jobs, because it's like, I feel like that's probably a better life long term than somebody who was semi-famous among a bunch of rage bros. Because the part about it is, if the people watching mixed martial arts and watching slap fights aren't doing those things, like whether it's through training or actual fighting, then the audience is just a bunch of wannabes. So all these people getting famous for a bunch of wannabe and to a bunch of wannabes, it's like, what's that fame even worth at the end of the day? So you're like cool to a bunch of fucking posers. Great. You got underpaid. You got a bunch of concussions. You don't have fucking insurance for the rest of your life. You don't have a 401k, but you were like viral on Twitter for a year or
Getting
two.
the
Okay,
snot
cool.
slapped out of them.
Was that really worth the fucking? I would personally rather work at UPS. That's, you know, in terms of like.
I knew a guy
I know.
out of high school who
Sorry,
had a job at UPS, and then within a couple of years, he was moving up the ranks, and he became a manager, and then I think he bought a house by the time we were all like 23, and you know, no debt, was able to do vacations and do all sorts of stuff that he wanted to do. That's a stable career path.
Well, and it's not even about the money and about the stability so much as like, okay, let's take Muay Thai, just Muay Thai, for example. When I was starting to train in that, one of the things that they tell you early on is like, because in Thailand, the kids start doing it at like, basically as soon as they can walk, if they're going to be into it, like, you can catch them as a non-Thai person, but it's gonna take basically like dedicating your entire being to that art for as long as it takes for you to catch them, because that's what they've been doing since they've been walking.
Yeah, it's intrinsic to their culture.
But the problem is, those dudes have like nerve damage by the time they're like 32, 33.
Yeah.
So they're like hobbling around like fucking old men before they're 40, because they've been kicking a bunch of shit and end up with, it's basically like, you're gonna get nerve damage. It's not like, oh, the lucky ones don't. No, you're gonna get nerve damage because of the nature of how hard they're hitting things, how frequently they're hitting things, and how repeatedly, in terms of like, it's just the same. There's not a whole lot. There's beauty in the simplicity of the art, and that's why it's effective. But there's not a whole lot of different moves. So when you're kicking the same spot for fucking decades, eventually your nerves are going to give in, because no human can keep up with that type of like
abuse.
Now they're starting to get into seasons, but it was like constant. There was no seasons, 20, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, there's no real seasons. So nobody got a time to heal. Excuse me. And so again, that's where that's just Muay Thai. So it's like, that's just the leg element, let alone the concussions or the fucking the arthritis in your hands from boxing, because you see okay. So we go to talk about boxers. You see a lot of them in their not even old age, they start to get arthritis really early on in their hands, because it's fucking, you're just repeatedly punching. So it's the same thing in terms of like wearing down the bone, but also the joints, and then in the process, your body doesn't get enough time to heal, and it's like cumulative damage in the same spots. Different combat sports end up getting these different types of like there's a boxer's fracture that's associated specifically with boxers getting it in that spot because of punching repeatedly. not to say that people who get boxer fractures got it from boxing. It's like the same thing as tennis elbow. It's like you don't necessarily get tennis elbow from playing tennis, um, but in terms of like mixed martial arts, we still are so early on in the sport that we don't have enough data to know like early on they used that as an excuse to be like, oh, it's not that terrible. The issue was now we know it's really bad because the people who were early on have started showing signs of all kinds of breakdown, like physical deterioration, um, very early. So it's not without any problems, but um, it's just not as like quick to bring death in terms of when someone gets a concussion that sends them into a coma and then they die. It's pretty clear that correlated with the match they were just like the boxing match they were just in when it happens like unfortunately as frequently as it does in boxing, whereas with mixed martial arts the deaths that happen are so disconnected in terms of like it's not happening like within 24 hours of somebody being in a martial arts match, but there's definitely unquestionably like Kevin Randleman, for example, he died from complications of a staph infection. But in grappling, staph is a huge problem. And it's something that people don't like to talk about. Like staph and ringworm are like wrestlers' problems. So like it's like because wrestling isn't a bunch of striking, excuse me, you don't see a bunch of wrestlers getting concussion issues. Like you can get concussions from slams, but slams don't happen that frequently. But ringworm does, and fucking staph does. So you see these like different ways that the ills of doing the same physical stress over and over it brings to these different combat sports, and then you mix them together because people start cross training, and it's like now you got people with fucking dementia and staph and fucking nerve damage in
Ringworm,
their
and they don't know where they
legs.
got it.
Exactly. I mean, bro, that's why I don't do jujitsu in terms of like jujitsu players do not wash their shit regularly. Some of them do. Of course, there's the exceptions, but in general, you walk into a jujitsu fucking gym and it smells like fucking shit because motherfuckers are like, oh, I'm gonna be hardcore. And to them, hardcore means like not washing your gi.
Ugh.
And it's like, no, it's gross. It's gross as fuck. But it's not the same with like judo players. Like judo players don't have that same problem. So it's like there's all these things about the different cultures, um, in terms of like there's no martial art that you practice without getting hurt, is what it comes down to. Even like Tai Chi, shit like that, where you're like, how are you gonna get hurt doing Tai Chi? Well, it's repetitive motion, and sometimes people get like don't take enough breaks and end up hurting something because of repetitive motion. You can do that shit with qigong, tai chi, any martial art. If you do too much repetition, you can end up hurting yourself, and that's not really. No martial art is going to tell you that when they're trying to get you into the door. It's only something you really like learn about after being in a gym for a while. And the only reason I learned that about Muay Thai is because our school wasn't a fighting school. So they would like let you know about all the other cult shit that goes on in Muay Thai fighting schools. Because don't get it twisted, just because I'm in Muay Thai, I'm not about to act like a lot of the schools aren't cultish, and like a lot of the schools don't have, or they do have cultures of like the head teacher banging everybody's girlfriend or wife or whatever, or swinging, and it's like shit gets real weird in Muay Thai schools and fucking jujitsu schools. Um, and it's not a coincidence, but it's because there's a lot of police officers in there, and the police officers do that weird shit, man. And so that's where I'm like, nothing against people doing consensual sexual stuff, but it's the issue of like when someone is in a position of authority, like the head of a school of any type, it becomes it's instantly weird that a sexual line gets crossed because it's like damn near impossible to separate that authority from like how a person has uh a charismatically tarnished perception of that person's intentions, in terms of like, if you go to somebody to help you like get better at something, after they help you get better at one thing, it it's really easy to think that they can help you get better at other things, which is why like martial arts teachers end up like giving life advice that they have no business giving. But it's because people tend to think that person, because they're like good at one thing, oh, this probably extends to the rest of their life. And it's like, sometimes it does, but not necessarily. It's probably more rare than not that person has mastered the rest of their life. Because I know I look at a lot of my experience with different teachers, and it's like they may master one thing, but then they don't have any of their social or romantic relationships mastered. And it's like, it's sketch when somebody has a lot of ex-wives.
Man, I had a guitar instructor once. He was actually really, really talented at the guitar, but he was a junkie. And he came over to my parents' house one day to give me a guitar lesson, and he was fumbling through his bag for his notes, and out pops his freaking rubber strap thing, and he like looks at me really like his eyes bugged out. We were both silent, and he's like, "Oh, this is my exercise band," and he picks it up and does this really, poor attempt at faking some kind of physical therapy exercise. And that was the last lesson I had with that guy. That guy
Man,
definitely didn't have his
crazy.
shit together, but he could play the guitar he was amazing at the guitar. That was the weird part. He could
It's
like
wild.
dissect.
Like,
He could dissect guitar performances like just by listening to them. It was.
dude, the first person I tried to, or I think really the only person I ever tried to get a guitar lesson from also happened to be a junkie, but I was like in kindergarten or something. So like this dude was friends with my dad, but he would constantly be fucking high and nodding off and shit. So it was like that shit didn't last like more than one lesson. Um, but it's like, yeah, man, I think
I think
a
there's a
lot of
generation that
people,
grew up with like listening to Miles Davis and John Coltrane and
right,
that era, and
exactly.
that era was
Yeah.
like rife with heroin.
Yeah, they had a different view on it than us, in
Yeah.
terms of like, it wasn't even just dare. It's more so like when you grow up seeing people nod off and you look and see other people not nodding off, it's like, oh, there's a difference between these drugs. Or when like you have a cousin or uncle or something that's like gnashing their teeth, and you're like, what's wrong with that person? And as a kid, you make these mental notes, and then you put it together as an adult, and then you're like, oh, this person was fucking always on cocaine or some shit, or whatever it was. And it's like, you pick up on it as a kid, even if nobody tells you, and you put it together later, which again, I think our generation just had more exposure to it in terms of like we had the Vietnam vets that were like, not getting medical help. They weren't getting medical support. Not as if they wanted, like, weren't going out and trying. Like, they weren't getting any help or offers of help. So it wasn't their fault. So then they were self-medicating, and then they were just like, e- anybody who had more than one male adult in their family probably had a Vietnam vet in there. So it's like somebody had a Vietnam vet uncle. Like, if you had an uncle, more often than not. So everybody ended up seeing or hearing about these drug addicts, and I think that is almost more what would have averted our generation from it than actual dare, in terms of like seeing how the families would treat that person and how that person would like be aloof, or those types of people, in terms of like,
I remember.
I have a sorry, go ahead.
I remember one of the first like parties I went to once I was going to IU, and one of the dare officers walked in like plain clothes, and then shortly after, one of the like the deputies who I actually went to high school with walked in, and he was in plain clothes, and so I rounded up my friends and we left. And it was really weird. Like, that's what Dare gave me an insight into. Is like, oh, they sent them into the schools to get an idea of who the kids were. I get it. They're like engaging in surveillance like at a very early age. And it was all like sanctioned by the state. When did they start? When did Dare even happen? Was that like a sixth grade, fifth, sixth grade? Do they even do that program anymore?
Man,
Does Dare even exist?
I feel like it was fifth grade. Yeah. It was either third or fifth.
Oh, it's still happening, it looks like.
But yeah, I always will never forget, in terms of like, Dare was definitely the first time I actually saw drugs in real life, which is
Yeah.
fucking crazy.
Drugs
Like,
introduced more
I
kids
was
to
like,
drugs than actual.
yeah, because that's when I'm like, is anybody like, oh, I think it was third grade, because I think it was, okay, I'm putting this together. It was at Skiles Test, which I did for one quarter semester in third grade. It was a
Oh, now the program is called Keep It Real.
of course, man. But yeah, I just remember, like, had never seen drugs in real life before until that fucking dumbass officer is like, this is what hash looks like. If anybody has this, you stay away from them. And you hear it, and it's like, it feels so cliche, in terms of, I feel like a lot of people's first time seeing drugs was with Dare, because there's no reason a fucking third grader needs to see some goddamn hash. Like, no fucking reason, man. No, anybody who's got hash ain't slinging that shit to a third grader, because their little lungs can't handle that shit. They ain't gonna come back and buy no more hash off you, because if they smoke it the first time, they'll start puking and they never want that shit again. You can't start off with no fucking hash for no goddamn. You kidding me? No, man. Which is where I'm like, they had no reason. Yeah, they showed us hash, heroin, fucking pills, man. Like, they had no business showing us all the shit they did. Which is where I'm like, in retrospect, the very notion of that program is like it feels like they were trying to set people up to fail. It's like, oh, 1 minute you go learn the fucking all the 50 states in a song. Now you go to the fucking next period and you're about to see all these drugs
Yeah, you're
and
gonna
it's like,
study drugs, illicit
is this
substances
Willy? Am I
class.
in Willy Wonka? What is going on? Are they gonna have us take the drugs, or did they give us the drugs? And this is all a test to see
Yeah,
if we want more
it was
drugs.
an illicit
Like,
substance test. They were teaching us all about illicit substances. It was this most like wackadoodle shit because wait, you're telling me that I need to know all about this stuff, but to stay away from it. But now I know all this stuff about it. What the hell? Why not just say don't do drugs and then show people the punishment or something, or show what happens, the consequences, instead of like, this is what this is. This is its street value. This is where you go get it. These are common locations where drugs are
like that
found.
Dave Chappelle skit.
Yeah.
Everybody know Martinez stuff is the bomb. Go down to 3rd Street and ask Martinez. You might as well what they were doing been what they were doing.
Man. Dare to tell the kids where to find drugs. Well, that just reinforces the idea behind the whole like school to prison pipeline.
Yeah, that's what, it definitely felt like that in terms of where they believe the kids aren't as viable for being good citizens or good contributors to society or whatever the fuck they want to call it. Like, oh yeah, we'll just make them prisoners or make it more likely that they will like make themselves prisoners.
Like the
Like,
kind
I
of
was in
resources that were
Indianapolis.
consumed to create these programs that taught people about illicit substances. If they just spent that money on something useful, like I don't know, a program in their school, that would be beneficial.
For sure.
They could have spent
Well, I
that
was
money
in
on a music
Indianapolis
program or the
yesterday.
arts programs or a,
Like, there's a juvenile detention center in downtown Indianapolis that's been there for fucking decades, and they haven't really. I don't know if you want them to update it or anything, but it's like I've driven by that thing since I was a kid, and I didn't know what it was at first, and then when I was a kid and realized other kids were like being held there, and it's like, basically just this little jail. It's like a small jail, but for kids. That shit would like fuck with me it still fucks with me every time I drive in terms of like the whole area sucks. It's because nobody wants to build a business next to a goddamn fucking juvenile detention center. So you have like Church's Chicken, a liquor store, another liquor store, a fucking gas station, a fucking gun shop. Like, nobody wants to build a goddamn business next to a juvenile detention center, but the problem is that's where the court is. So it's like, you also don't want people, in terms of if their kids do get in trouble, you don't want them to have to drive out of town to go to juvenile court, and you also don't want them being held out of town in juvenile court. So it's also like, do we really need a juvenile court, or is there something alternative that we can do? Which is where I'm like, not having evolved past that juvenile court in my lifetime so far is like, it doesn't seem like they're trying, because I'm seeing how the area around the juvenile court has stayed the same, and it's been this low level. Like, it's not ghetto. It's what happens when businesses don't want to fucking move there. Because you can't blame that shit on like black people culture or anything like that in terms of why the area is like that. Because there's a ton of black areas in Indianapolis that are nice.
Wait.
that
So
aren't like
so
that.
not wanting to live next to a juvenile detention center is a black culture thing?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's like
Only
there's
black
only
people
black
don't.
people in that area, but you go farther north and it's nice and it's still mostly black people. So it's like, no, it's not. You go to these like cities like Detroit or fucking Houston or Atlanta, DC, and you see the bad parts of them on TV in terms of like, oh, it looks like these or Baltimore, it looks like these places are bad because they're black, and it's what they're trying to frame it as, and that's the way the like Fox News portrayal of these cities is, or like how they use Chicago's like violence, but they don't show you the black suburbs, or they don't
Man,
show you the like black nice parts of town, because that completely disrupts their narrative. So it
but
can't like reinforce a stereotype.
these are also people that would never be invited to the barbecue.
Oh, of course, of
Like, so
course.
it's like the idea that they could even they could accurately report on what happens in a community that they can only observe from a distance.
It's so funny in terms of like, I watched a Vice documentary about it's they're called no-go zones, and it was about Detroit, and it was like how the drugs are being run and how the like abandoned houses are being used for like drop houses, and you would think there's like people running around in purge masks everywhere in fucking Detroit based on this fucking documentary in the way that they framed it. And I'm like, oh my God, nobody tell white people what Detroit is actually like and let them keep thinking that Detroit is like this shit, because it's so far. Like in white people's minds, Detroit has gotten worse since RoboCop, and in their minds, like Detroit is not far from fucking RoboCop. So that's where I'm like looking at what Detroit is framed, or how Detroit is presented in media versus how it actually is when you go there. And I'm like, oh shit, nobody tell white people what it's really like there.
You know,
Cause then it's just
it's funny. I've wandered around at night in Detroit and Chicago and New York and Oakland, and I think Detroit was actually the most peaceful environment that I was wandering around at night in. It was
because it's
definitely
the least people. It's
uh,
like smaller than Indianapolis at this point,
yeah.
as far as
It
people go.
it
But it's
wasn't
like the size of Chicago.
yeah, like the roads were not overrun and psychotic. People weren't gassing it between stoplights. They were. It actually seemed like everything was functioning, albeit less crowded and not to capacity. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure a city operating at capacity is a good thing. I don't think anything actually operating at capacity can be a good thing. There should be like a there's like an optimal um, optimal relative utilization of the resources of an environment, and at full capacity is definitely not the optimal rate of anything.
Yeah, to that point, I think it is okay. I've I've been thinking a lot about the notion of like time management, where there is a space management corollary that isn't really acknowledged in our society. And this is where like not you, but a person is like given the notion of space as if space organizes itself around a person naturally and organically, when obviously that's not the way things happen. But increasingly, I don't know if you've ever seen like Sherlock and the notion of like a mind palace, but what I'm starting to realize is like a person's daily surroundings are their mind palace, whether they like it or not. And if a person isn't in the same space, their mind palace is going to be very scattered. But further, this is why I think in terms of like how people are organized or disorganized in their personal spaces, it like strongly correlates to their mindsets, and it's not like coincidental, but it's also because again, the space management is not being valued. So there's this element of like, if you got if you get a maid or someone to clean your space, that's higher acclaimed than cleaning your own space in our society. And that's problematic for various reasons. But back to the notion of the mind palace, like, I think that's also why a lot of people don't have a connection with their past or a collective past, in terms of like their mind palace is scattered all over the place, and then they're not even restructuring it. Like, imagine if you used dishes and didn't clean up after yourself and didn't put the dishes away and then went to use the dishes again without consulting the person that cleaned up after you. You might find those dishes. You might not, if that person cleaned them up and put them in a regular spot frequently because they were doing it so much. Oh yeah, it'd be much easier. But in terms of like establishing routines and also interactions, people are very scattered in letting other people establish their routines, but then also not cleaning up after themselves as part of their routines. And you see this in terms of like, if five people are cleaning up and a sixth person is around, that sixth person is either going to watch those five people clean up or help out. And it's one or the other. And in terms of like why that person decides to help out unprompted, or if they get asked, they might even refuse. So there's this level and range of like understanding that things need to get cleaned up and need to get put back in place. It's a matter of who's going to do it. And I think this is also where, like, whether it's a project or a story or a conversation, people that don't clean up after themselves are a lot more likely to lose threads and other things because they're not the ones that are coordinating the organization. And the more that they give up the coordination of that organization to somebody else, the easier it is for them to just float around until something breaks down, and then they want to like get mad at whoever is the coordinator. But it's like a lot of these people are just like automatons, figuring out ways to let other people coordinate their lives. And it's like, inevitably that shit it's unsustainable for various reasons, but I see it happening in all these different demographics. Um, and I think it's gonna break down here fairly soon.
I wonder how many times people get promoted into a position where they ultimately end up with less workload than they did to get into the position, with the expectation that with the amount of additional time they have, that they would develop the process or refine the process or improve whatever is going on, but don't do that and just sit in that role. And then eventually somebody else is promoted to do those things, and eventually somebody is found who will do those things. But how many people do they have to promote to that level before somebody actually does those things? And this is, of course, very hypothetical because I don't even know what people do at the executive level after a certain point.
that person is
some kind of VP of
the one in the
something.
group project that they Jeff Wingered every time.
Ugh.
They charisma their way into letting everybody else do the work and think that they contributed by being charismatic.
Just by being present.
Yeah, it's like Jeff Winger and Ava from Abbott Elementary, like that. I guess technically the Michael Scott too.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, there's always at least one person in every group who's going to try to claim credit for everything, every idea, and every decision, and that they were the leader the whole time, and their guidance is what brought the project to success. There's always one person like that. But I think with the way the last group project I did, everything was recorded who submitted what portion of everything, and so maybe it's getting better at the education level to determine who actually is contributing and how much time a person actually is putting into a project. Maybe that's the thing that blockchain will actually do for education that it couldn't do for finance.
well, and this is where I'm not I'm not one looking to be like I'm trying to lead stuff in real life, but this is where I think the simulations and virtual give good experience to give insight as to why one wouldn't want to do something. So in this game I've been playing, No Man's Sky, like you can become captain of a freighter, or you can like become an overseer of a settlement, and the decisions will affect the happiness of the people that are in this place. And so it's like the notion of having to balance income with the happiness is like, it's an interesting dynamic that I thought that they put into that. Like obviously in real life there's way more variables, but I think in terms of like presenting that notion of like leaders have to constantly balance uh things that are not necessarily tangible against other things that can be tangible in ways that have definite results that are unpredictable until they happen. So I think it's interesting in terms of like being a leader is very unscientific, and it's very lead with your gut, with what you know, because it has to be, but also like you said, with AI and blockchain, there are things that could be automated in leadership in terms of like, if there's a pothole, it probably needs to be fixed.
Do we
Like,
really need a committee to determine whether or not a pothole needs to be
do we
fixed?
really need a committee to determine that? I don't think so. Like, if somebody fires at a starship, you should probably go to evasive maneuvers. Do you really need a captain to tell the ensign, hey, go to evasive maneuvers? There's like certain shit where we can look at the situation and be like, okay,
I think the captain
I
should be saying something along the lines of adjust our sensors so that we can see these things sooner and start like change the
why
scan
wouldn't they do that
parameters.
anyway though?
They should be doing that, but if
You know
for
what I'm
whatever
saying?
reason something
How are
like
they
manages to get
qualified
through
to
the sensor system, like I thought we had this shit figured out by now. We should be able to scan,
shouldn't they be doing that anyway?
they should.
Like,
They should be able to detect like some kind of energy emissions of
what are
any
they even
kind.
sitting there for if they're not doing that? Like, otherwise, somebody should be like, they should be doing something somewhere else if they're not doing that specific thing constantly.
They're conducting visual observations.
Because it's like, otherwise, why are they sitting there? Like, yeah, once you punch in the coordinates, it's a matter of making sure that nothing takes you out of warp or impulse, like
I mean,
what you can feel.
assuming a research expedition gets to its destination relatively unscathed, one would assume that the first thing they would do is begin taking readings of everything. Just start scanning everything. Anything anomalous should be like addressed immediately. They should be scanning for like, a can floating around, because if that thing hits their ship, who knows what it'll do? It could take out their entire communications array.
And it's like, if there's nothing on the long range scanner, it shouldn't be like wiping down the console. Like, surely that shit gets dusty.
Man,
You never see anybody dusting the fucking bridge. Like,
it's because they don't want to admit where the dust comes from. Ugh.
on the original episode, or on the original series, on one episode, somebody at one point they're serving coffee on the bridge, and I'm like, is this supposed to be like a
The love
leisure
boat.
cruise? Right, yeah, it totally Love Boat vibes. It's like the way, all the women are in the shortest skirts possible, and in terms of like,
And with
it's
every
like,
episode, more of Kirk's chest is revealed.
well, they're like one sneeze away from a butt cheek fucking coming out, and it's like it never happens, but it's like, I don't know what kind of magic that tailor or seamstress had to have the fucking skirts so short, but no cheek was ever seen. It's fucking insane, actually, where I'm like, I don't think you could pull that shit off in modern times.
Adhesive.
Like,
It was they
whatever
directly adhered the
fucking
fabric
magic.
to the booty.
Yeah, I don't know. But it's like, it's remarkable in terms of like, if you watch Project Runway, the limitation of time that they all run up against, wardrobe malfunctions happen constantly, in terms of like usually one person working on one outfit. Sometimes, like a lot of times, they're gonna come up on an idea that they have to tape instead of sew to pull it off in time, and that ends up with like something popping out sometimes. So the idea that all these people on this show aren't having wardrobe malfunctions, because there's a lot of people needing wardrobes and there's no wardrobe malfunctions happening, that shit's fucking actually really remarkable. Which is where, full circle, in terms of like, when they have somebody serving people coffee on the bridge, a nameless yeoman, where I don't think she ends up coming, like, there's a few that get named, but I think she's literally just like coffee person and never to be seen again.
I bet those roles were all cast for someone's niece or someone's,
Right,
some
that's what it feels
producer's
like.
daughter, or just like, hey, my niece is in town. Can you put her on the show? Yeah, why not?
But I was also thinking, like, what if it's a way that they actually got coffee breaks off during shoots, and it makes it seem like this like cool little way.
That's
of
actually
them, like,
brilliant.
That's what I'm saying. In my, like, briefly, I'm like, oh, what if this is actual like thing that they worked out as a deal? I didn't look it up because the notion of that in my mind was more fun than confirming or denying, because it may not even be possible to find it out like now, unless I found somebody, because the story may be out there and it may not. But the notion of them using that as a way to actually have coffee breaks when they're like, oh, they were shooting at like 4 a.m. and this one shot, they're like, I'll just have her take it on, put her in a fucking Starfleet uniform and have them taking their coffee. And then they're like, wait a minute, that shot worked really well. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm like. And then from that point on, they kept it that way. Because it's like little shit like that where I'm like, I don't think you only have to do it once, but because you don't see that very often, like, that's the first time I've ever seen anybody with food on the bridge in any form, which I thought it was probably not allowed because everybody goes to the fucking mess hall. So that's where I'm like, the notion of, I guess I would assume the electronics were fucking waterproof, but the idea of somebody having an open lid coffee around the controls of the fucking starship seems terribly like unnecessarily dangerous for like unless it was just like that's what I mean.
The idea of a coffee maker anywhere on a spaceship with a carafe of coffee, like just sitting there, an urn of coffee, just sitting there waiting to be consumed. That just seems like a terrible idea. Hot liquid in space. If the gravity goes out, then you've got like hot balls of liquid floating around.
What's funny is I just saw they have a special coffee mug for astronauts that like you can spray the coffee into
And it stays in there.
and it stays in there and like you can like shake the mug around, but it only comes out if you like drink out of it like with suction.
Interesting.
Because the shape of the mug allows it to have an open lid, but also
it's like one of those Pythagorean goblets where you can pour it into it, and it has a channel like a built-in straw from the bottom, and there's enough air pressure so that you can pull it from the bottom with ease.
It's really cool in terms of like, then you can have hot coffee in space.
Yeah.
Which is like, you know, the little things in terms of what they do think about for the astronauts, and what they're able to actually get like delivered to them. Because it would suck to be in space and only be able to drink iced coffee. If you are a person that appreciates coffee, like having a hot cup of coffee in space has to be the best coffee ever. In terms of like,
it's all freeze dried. It's freeze dried and made with pee.
If aesthetics didn't affect coffee, all of the coffee shops would look like dispensaries.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's true.
Because clearly aesthetics don't give a fuck, or your high does not give a fuck about aesthetics, because all the weed shops look like shit on the inside. And it's like damn near a requisite to have a dispensary. Like, is it gonna look like a fucking empty warehouse that just got turned into like?
Is it a garage with
clearance store?
A garage with with an iPad and a square a square dongle?
Man, but yeah, apparently aesthetics your high does not get affected by aesthetics of the.
I mean, I've seen
establishment where coffee definitely does.
I've seen pictures of hemp shops that look like they want to be pharmacies or beauty shops, but that's usually because they only have like 12 products and they have a lot of space to fill it out with.
Yeah, I do feel like the hemp shops have their own like.
They're like trying to be bougier than dispensaries though.
Yeah,
because
it's weird.
They've got to convince people to spend high dollar on something that.
Yeah. I mean, it costs the same as weed in certain, you know, at a certain price point.
Sometimes it's more expensive because a lot of those like topical, damn motorcycle dude. A lot of those topical hemp-derived products, or the like what is it, transdermal or sublingual or edible hemp products. Some of those things cost more than weed or THC containing products at dispensaries.
Yeah.
And because they involve more processing. Like a lot of the stuff that's legal, like the THC 8, the Delta 8, the Delta 0, and all that new stuff, it's truly an industrial process that derives those things are derived from. Like nobody is making Delta 8 at home with hemp. It's too complicated. Nobody is extracting Delta 0 because it's even more complex to get it right. And these are like made out of like the leftovers essentially. And so they're making money because obviously they're making money because they're able to derive a product out of what amounts to waste product. And so that's kind of cool, but some of the stuff is so expensive, and I'm not sure it actually does what people think it does. Because, you know, every so often I read about how some THC testing lab, has been fudging the data for, you know, the entirety of their existence.
Well, and the problem is, people will gravitate towards the labs that give the highest results. So it's like,
Yeah.
go to 3, you're definitely going to put the one that gives the highest results on your label.
Yeah.
Even if it's like, you know, out of outside the margin of error or some shit. And it's like, I don't necessarily put any stock in the THC percentages. I definitely try to get the highest percentage. If I'm going to a dispensary, I'm like, what's the highest percentage stuff you got? You know, just
Yeah.
Just because it's like, then unquestionably that's probably going to be the strongest THC content in that place, but it may not be what it says.
Yeah.
Because in Colorado, one of the times I went, it was like 91% on some live resin hash, like Ghost Train Haze. I'll never forget that shit. I couldn't finish it.
Like, man, I gotta go. I gotta stop. I can't go any further. I'm done.
I mean, you know, I think it's so funny when you like are in a place for a day and your lungs are bigger than your eyes, or your eyes are bigger than your lungs, in terms of like, I think I got like a gram of that, and then probably like an eighth or some shit, and I didn't finish either one. And it was like, I thought I was being conservative in terms of like, oh, this, you know, whatever, it'll get me through. And I'm like, oh, not only did it get me through, I didn't even fucking finish half of it. And it's like,
Man.
you feel like you're wasting it, but they got the goddamn thing at the airport to throw it away specifically. Like, don't forget to toss away your weed. It's like,
man, there's
somebody's gonna smoke it.
That's got to be the weirdest job. Like, hey, your job is to go around and empty the weed disposal containers.
Oh yeah, that shit ain't getting thrown out. It's definitely getting smoked. That's got to be the best job.
They're probably disposing of certain things that they know they can't like get away with, but I'm sure that there's a significant amount of the stuff that ends up in those containers that's like, well, no one's accounting for it. It's not like they have to fill out paperwork. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm disposing of 0.6 grams of weed. Here's all my information. That's not happening.
I don't think anybody would be rude enough to throw like gum or like a Coke in there or some shit that's gonna like,
yeah,
they have too much if you paid $30 or whatever for a gram, you're not gonna like desecrate that with some actual trash. Even though it's going into a bin. It's like
I bet in like the break room there's like a collection of all of the cartridges and pens and
oh fuck yeah.
Like a trophy wall, like display of all of the crazy fucking battery powered things that people have just thrown away at the last minutes. Like using it to the very end.
Yeah. Again, I know people are like, people are hitting that shit like right as they're walking up to drop it into that bin.
Yeah, they're like standing around it like the smoker circles back in the day.
yeah, it's me. I'm people.
Well, I mean, we just live in a state that's trying to figure out how the best way that they can get their cut before they open the floodgates.
It's only a matter of time before
Yeah.
the shit is legal here.
I,
It's already hemp's already legal,
it's
which again,
crazy
it's
to
like,
me to think about how much money Colorado generated for its education system, and then they had so much money that they diverted that towards like reproductive health care, and then lo and behold, like teenage pregnancy rates dropped. And then they had enough money they could start really fixing their roads, and the list keeps on getting weirder and weirder. Like all the benefits of having a recreational weed economy. You'd think that Indiana, a place where anything grows, literally anything can grow here, like you'd think that farmers would be like just it like chomping at the bit to get in on that kind of economy.
well, now when the government's subsidizing corn,
Yeah,
you know, they'll
corn.
keep on making that corn money as long as they can.
Good old corn and soy. Corn and soy. Because
Oh yeah.
we export a lot of soy, or we America exports a lot of soy to China.
Oh, I thought you were talking about just Indiana.
Well, Indiana too. Indiana has a huge agreement for soy with China. But in general, the United States exports a lot of soy to China, which is really crazy. You'd think that China would be able to produce enough soy too.
Well, they probably export theirs because it's like
They export
if
theirs.
you can if you can export at a enough of a net positive, then it's better than selling it locally, which is what ends up happening with oil
Yeah.
in a lot of cases, which is fucking stupid. It's like everybody's taking their oil and selling it across the ocean and making it go higher in
And
price.
then they have to buy more oil and have it shipped back in.
Yeah, basically. It's fucking stupid, man. It doesn't it doesn't benefit anybody driving. Definitely doesn't, but
Wow.
yeah. I don't I don't know how much longer corporations can actually go on in terms of like it'd be one thing if they were making good decisions, but they're making fucking horrible decisions in the last year.
Yeah.
It's like remarkable how bad corporations decision making has been in a way where I'm like, are you guys like trying to sink this shit? Because it's like that's what it looks like to me in terms of like that's it's not the most logical explanation. I know the most logical explanation is everybody's been faking it till they're making till they quote unquote made it and it's all falling apart at once. But it looks so coordinated in terms of like all these bad corporate decisions happening at once that like one's human conspiracy prone mind would be like, are they doing this on purpose? Obviously not. But it's like it's just so like such a massive wave of like, oh, this is going to result in failure. This is going to oh, this company's been failing for the last 4 years, and people are just trying to like not frame it that way.
I'm
This
I
company,
I think
massive
there's a
failure.
culture that is just in there to get theirs while they can, and they don't care what happens long term. And I think that as long as their dividends keep producing for them or whatever, then they're happy. And so
But they're not.
I know,
That's
but
the issue. Is
they
all that
can.
shit's coming to an end.
Yeah. So the people who are we're gonna see people trying to get out while they getting's good, and then there's gonna be just like with crypto, they're gonna be people who hodl because they think that it'll come back around if they just wait and wait it out because the market will restore itself or some other malarkey, and as long as some CEO is producing numbers that on paper look good to the board, then everything is hunky dory. They're gonna somebody else is gonna end up with this problem. Not I think that's how they see it. Let it be somebody else's problem to solve. It won't be my issue. I won't be here for it. We don't hear about like executives who are like at the head of a company when it fails getting the bulk of the blame, but there's no we don't really hear about all the other executives who made decisions that led to that moment, because the failure of a company probably starts with a culture that exists, hopefully a little bit longer than like the last executive who is at the helm. One would think that a corporate culture is more stable than that, but maybe I'm wrong.
When's the last time you've heard of somebody becoming a Bitcoin millionaire? And on that same
Is that
point,
even a thing anymore?
Have you heard of anyone becoming an AI millionaire?
No, I've heard the only stuff I read about AI is that developers are leaving their projects that they've been at the helm of for the last 20 years, and they're afraid now because everything is happening faster than they could possibly have predicted, and that like they were wrong. I keep reading that. These guys are all saying we were wrong. We shouldn't have done this.
Amazing.
It's incredible. Like the audacity is like, yeah, we're gonna change our world, and then oh shit, guys, this thing works. Fuck, what have we done? But the weird part is that there are a lot of big companies that are still trying to bring their AIs online. Like we know the music industry wants to have its production AI online because then it can just create music and they won't have to pay musicians. Because, fuck, that fake Drake song, that was apparently people liked it.
No, they didn't though. They listened to it, but that doesn't mean they liked it. And further, this is like you had to have an original Drake to make a fake Drake.
That's
like,
true.
Because this is where I'm like, bro, can you name one cover band that is bigger than the original? Please.
Cover band that's bigger than the original.
No, there's not one. There's not fucking one.
Is that even possible?
No. It's not fucking possible. No. Because the cover band is never going to be as good as the original. The only way the cover band is going to be bigger than the original is if the original breaks up and they're still going to sell old records.
Oh, no. I know how this works.
I mean,
there's one example, George Clinton and the P-Funk All-Stars doing covers of funkadelic songs. But that's really loose.
No, that's not a cover band. But
it's not a cover band because he was part of the composition team. But it's a different band.
P-Funk and funkadelic,
or might as well do the same thing.
Bootsy and then George have a symbiotic relationship. Yeah. So they're not covering each other.
No, I know.
It's like when you write something, like.
But that's like the closest I can come up with is like that it's a band with one name playing songs that were released by a different band's name, even though realistically the only difference between Funkadelic, Parliament, P-Funk All-Stars, Bootsy Collins and the P-Funk All-Stars, like any of those iterations is just the lineup of a revolving door of musicians, and none of them can actually be replaced because as soon as you take away the diaper guy and replace him with the wedding dress guy, they've got a different sound, but the songs are still the same songs.
Well, if you cover yourself, it's a remix. It's not a cover.
Yeah, or a remake, or just a different version. Which
again, that's where like
George Clinton's totally allowed to play his own music.
Yeah, it's still not a cover.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. That's like the closest I can come up with and it's just this is basically the same band with a different name. That's as close as I can come up with.
I mean, at one point they weren't the same band in terms of like, him and Bootsy weren't always in the same band, and at one time
Bernie Worrell wasn't even in the band at some points.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not like it's the same. It's similar to how like it's certain. There's a point where Jamiroquai is, not the original lineup, but it's still Jamiroquai.
Right, and that's where again it's like when Queen is, what is it? Who did they have? It wasn't Sam Smith.
I thought it
was it Sam Smith?
It was the guy from Bad Company, I thought. Maybe it was
whoever it was. Whenever if they have a different lead singer, a different guitarist, but it's still functionally Queen, then they're not covering. They're doing their own song. So that's where I'm like,
Adam
I'm
Lambert.
of the
That's who it
mind.
is. Adam Lambert.
Oh, Adam Lambert. Okay,
He's got a
I knew it was
great voice
somebody.
too. Did he
Yeah,
leave
he is
Queen?
good.
Yeah, he left Queen.
Um,
Wow, he left Queen.
I feel like he's
That's the kind of place you don't want your career to end. That's that's
yeah,
like those guys are at the
yeah,
end of the road, and he's still got like
yeah,
the rest of his career.
definitely,
And
definitely.
he's
I
got
think
an
that was a smart
incredible
move.
voice. Anybody who can even remotely pretend to fill Freddie's shoes is like has an incredible voice.
Yeah, I mean, and also I think he can dance, if I'm not mistaken,
Hmm.
or at least relatively enough to like he's not as stiff.
He's a good
You don't have two
performer.
left feet. Yeah.
It's not like watching George
He
Michael's
can't
just
dance
sway
as
back
well
and
as
forth.
Justin, but he's not. I don't think he's like got two left feet.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I haven't seen or listened to any Queen performances, like new Queen performances in a while. So I imagine though that their stage shows are highly orchestrated because I mean just due to the nature of their music. I bet they're like Pink Floyd in the sense that they know everything that's going to happen before it happens, and anything that deviates is something that they have to have a meeting about later. And speaking of Pink Floyd, Roger Waters was apparently like on stage wearing an SS uniform, further cementing the claims of um, David Gilmour's wife that he's a anti-Semite. He's being investigated by like Berlin, whatever Germany's like intelligence service. They're like investigating him now for like anti-Semitism.
I thought they were doing a scene from The Wall.
He probably was doing a scene from The Wall,
I'm
but it
pretty
pissed
sure
a
they were
bunch of
doing a
people
scene
off.
from The Wall.
Yeah. No, he's like he's reproducing all of his contributions to Pink Floyd, which is fine because that's his music. But apparently he's getting in trouble for it,
Yeah.
for being
Yeah, the truth
extremely
will come out
politically active.
eventually.
Eventually,
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what actually happened. Because, like, I saw the story, and then I saw, like, a day later, like, people were like, it's obviously The Wall. And I'm like, well, maybe. I don't know. I wasn't there. So it probably was The Wall. But, yeah, maybe he was just
that's
using The Wall as an excuse. I don't know.
I mean, The Wall is supposed to be anti-fascist. The whole album, the entire message of the Wall is
Right, exactly.
anti-fascism.
Of course.
And so, man, if
Which is why
that's
this
even
seems like a
crazier.
weird-
That's so much
Yeah,
crazier
this-
that like we've come this far, and yet now The Wall is being misinterpreted somehow. Maybe it's too intense for people that don't remember Nazis.
I mean, at the same time, maybe it's just because of the German law in terms of like you're not allowed to do that.
Oh yeah, well,
So like
there is
he may
that.
have been doing that performance everywhere and not gotten investigated once, but you do that shit in Germany, yeah, you might have just broken a fucking major law and then have to own up to it no matter who you are. Whether the message is anti-fascist or not.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just go around using Nazi imagery. Like, you will have to answer for that shit if you do it in Germany. And as a matter of fact, because we are, what's it called? Allies with Germany, like, and have treaties with them. If you say some shit on Twitter, German people can report you. You may not have to like, fucking do anything. Like, if you never go to Germany, you may not have anything happen. But if you have that, like, if you post some Nazi shit and somebody in Germany flags you and you ever go to Germany, that shit, you may have to go to court over it. Because in terms of, like, they don't play around that shit at all. Like, I got flagged from Germany for something where it was, I mean, I'm not, I'm definitely not posting any pro-Nazi shit. It might have been for like about punching a Nazi or some shit. Because I definitely frequently post about punching Nazis.
Maybe someone wants to buy you a beer next time you go to Germany. That's
Well, there's like, I don't know if you've ever read like Guy Gardner, Green Lantern issues, but he like openly punches Nazis and shit. So I'm like, oh, he's definitely one of my favorite Green Lanterns.
yeah.
And I'll frequently, if anybody's like Guy Gardner, I'll like repost to him punching him, like talking about punching Nazis, like frame, just because it's like always appropriate.
So there's
I feel like
speaking
that's
of
probably
punching Nazis. There's a movie called Sisu. It's about a guy in Finland who's had enough, and he finds some gold, and he encounters some Nazis. And next thing you know, he's killing Nazis. And man, so I'm only like an hour into it, but this is one of the more enjoyable iterations of old man Rambo that I've ever seen. He's tough as fucking nails. Like tougher than nails. Nails take a step back and say, "No, man, it's cool. We don't want none of you." Like Sisu it's pretty.
Where did you come upon this film?
I just my dad told me about it.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Man, why are you not showing me? Why is it doing this to me? See more. Now, of course, I can't find it.
Yeah, I see it on IMDb. Came out in 2022.
Yeah.
It's like, never heard of these people.
Yeah, it takes place in northern Finland during the last days of World War II, and this version of an old tough guy is really impressive. I recommend just at least watching the first half hour of it, and that was enough for me to think, man, I need to finish watching this movie. This is holy crap, this guy's tough. And he's not exactly Rambo, but he's in the vein of Rambo. That kind of fortitude, push through anything, kind of just tough as can be. It's pretty good. I also just watched John Wick 4, which I've decided that the John Wick series exists as a simulation within the Matrix, and it's such a good simulation that Neo and Morpheus can't wake up from it. And that's part of the reason they don't die, even though he got pelted with probably like 300 bullets at least, and got thrown down a flight of stairs like a couple times. Not just a flight of stairs, but like a real serious flight of stairs. Like nobody's. That's just cartoon level toughness. But if it's in the Matrix, then it all makes sense, because it can be that tough in the Matrix. Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos shows produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.